"What did you do to my son?" the billionaire yelled, panic ripping through his voice as he saw his autistic boy bloody and trembling in the maid's arms. This was the moment everything changed, when suspicion, fear, and truth collided in the Drake mansion. Before we dive into this story, make sure you hit the subscribe button and comment where you're watching from. We want to know how far this story will travel, because what you're about to hear is packed with betrayal, heartbreak, and a twist you'll never see coming. Now, let's begin. Rain streaked the windows of the Drake estate like tears that refused to be wiped away. The house itself stood like a monument, towering, polished, perfect. But inside its walls, emptiness echoed louder than the storm outside. Nathaniel Drake, one of the wealthiest men in America, sat at the edge of his desk with a glass of untouched bourbon in his hand, staring into the kind of silence that money could never buy peace from. His life was an empire built on control, discipline, and calculated risks. Yet here he was, a prisoner to the one truth he could not manage. He had no idea how to reach his own son. Ethan was 8, bright, beautiful, fragile. Born with autism, he lived in a world Nathaniel couldn't quite touch no matter how hard he tried. The boy avoided eye contact, flinched at loud noises, and melted into despair when routines shifted even slightly. His late mother had been the bridge, the calm presence who could quiet Ethan's storms. But she had been gone for 3 years, taken suddenly by a heart attack that shattered Nathaniel's world. Since then, Nathaniel had done what he knew best: build walls, walls around his pain, walls around his son, walls that kept everyone at a safe, professional distance. The staff moved like shadows through the mansion. They feared Nathaniel's temper and respected his fortune, but they did not love him, and he returned the favor. His son was cared for by nannies and therapists who never lasted long. Ethan's outbursts, his resistance, his screaming fits drove them away, leaving Nathaniel with little more than sterile routines and resignation. Then came Amara Johnson. She arrived without fanfare, a young black woman in her late 20s carrying a modest suitcase and an air of quiet determination. Nathaniel had barely glanced at her when the agency sent her over. A maid was a maid, he thought, and he expected her to perform her duties without fuss, just as the others had. What he didn't expect was the way her presence would begin to seep into the cracks of the Drake household like sunlight slipping through blinds. At first, her presence was hardly noticeable. She kept her head down, performed her work diligently, and never crossed boundaries. Yet Nathaniel began to notice small things. The way she softened her footsteps when she passed Ethan's room. The way her voice lowered, warm and melodic, whenever she greeted the boy, even when he didn't respond. She didn't try to force interaction, didn't attempt to smother him with pity. She simply let him be, her patience quiet but unwavering. Nathaniel, on the other hand, was growing more frustrated by the day. That evening, as thunder rolled outside, Ethan had refused to eat dinner. The staff tried coaxing him, and Nathaniel, exhausted from a day of meetings, lost his temper. "For God's sake, Ethan, just eat something." His voice thundered louder than the storm, and Ethan recoiled instantly, his small hands clutching his ears as he whimpered. Nathaniel's chest ached as guilt surged, but before he could say anything, Amara stepped forward. She crouched low, her face level with Ethan's, and spoke softly, almost like a song. "It's okay, sweetheart. You don't have to be scared. Just breathe with me." Her hands moved rhythmically, showing him how to take deep breaths. Slowly, painfully, Ethan lowered his hands, watching her with wide, trembling eyes. And for the first time in weeks, he calmed. Nathaniel stood frozen, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. Later that night, when the house had gone quiet, Ethan wandered into the grand hallway, clutching his toy car. In his distracted state, he tripped against the edge of the marble step, his small body crashing to the floor. The sharp cry that tore from his throat jolted Nathaniel from his study. He rushed out to find his son sprawled on the floor, blood seeping from a cut on his forehead. Time seemed to stop. The glass of bourbon slipped from his hand, shattering on the ground. But someone else was already there. Amara had dropped to her knees, cradling Ethan against her chest, one hand pressing gently against the wound, the other stroking his back. Her voice was steady, calm, even though her hands shook. "Shh, baby, you're okay. I've got you. You're safe." Ethan whimpered, trying to resist, but when she hummed softly, his trembling eased. He clung to her uniform, burying his face into her shoulder, and Nathaniel's heart clenched at the sight. He had never seen his son allow anyone, let alone a stranger, to hold him like that. Blood stained Amara's sleeve, yet she didn't flinch. She rocked him gently, whispering words Nathaniel couldn't quite make out, but they worked like magic. His son, who rejected touch, who fought comfort, was clinging to this woman as though she were the only anchor in a storm. Nathaniel felt something he hadn't in years. Not power, not control, but helplessness. He stood there, rooted, watching as Amara soothed his boy with a tenderness that stripped away all pretense. In that moment, the billionaire who commanded industries, who bent markets to his will, realized he was a stranger to the one thing that mattered most, his son's heart. When Amara finally looked up, her eyes met Nathaniel's. There was no fear in them, no apology for crossing boundaries, only a steady resolve, as though she had silently told him, "This is what your son needs, whether you approve or not." Nathaniel's throat tightened, words failing him. The storm outside raged on, but inside that hallway, Nathaniel Drake's carefully constructed fortress began to crack. And though he didn't yet know it, the maid he had barely noticed would become the key to everything he thought he had lost. The days that followed the accident shifted the air inside the mansion. Nathaniel, though he tried to return to his detached routine, found his eyes drawn constantly toward the maid who had steadied the chaos that night. Amara moved through the house with the same quiet diligence, but now Nathaniel noticed details he had overlooked before. The careful patience in her gestures, the calm tone she used when speaking to Ethan, the way her presence seemed to soften the edges of the boy's world. Ethan, once withdrawn, began gravitating toward her. At breakfast, when he normally picked at food or pushed it away, Amara gently placed the plate in front of him, humming a soft tune while she cut fruit into small, colorful pieces. Ethan's hands twitched nervously, but eventually he reached for a piece, nibbling while watching her closely. Nathaniel had been standing near the doorway, unseen, his chest tightening with both awe and discomfort. His own attempts at coaxing Ethan to eat had ended in raised voices and slammed utensils, yet here was Amara. No force, no demands, just patience. And it worked. At dinner one evening, Nathaniel's frustration boiled again. Ethan refused to touch the plate prepared by the chef, shaking his head violently and pushing it away. Nathaniel's voice grew sharp, tension rising in his tone. "Ethan, you have to eat. Stop this nonsense." The boy's eyes widened, panic flaring. But before the situation could erupt, Amara slipped into the scene. She crouched beside Ethan, her tone gentle, soothing, like a hand brushing across water. "You don't like this one? That's okay. How about just a little bread first?" She tore a small piece and placed it before him, smiling as though it were no battle at all. Ethan stared at it for a long moment, then hesitantly took it. The chewing was slow, deliberate, but it was eating nonetheless. Nathaniel clenched his jaw, torn between relief and humiliation. Later that night, when he found Amara in the kitchen rinsing plates, he couldn't help his words, edged with pride, though softened by curiosity. "How did you do that?" She glanced at him, brow furrowing slightly. "It's not about forcing him. It's about making him feel safe. You push too hard, he shuts down." Nathaniel bristled at the honesty, but part of him knew she was right. Conversations between them began to stretch beyond brief instructions. Late at night, Nathaniel would wander into the kitchen or study and find Amara tidying quietly. At first, he'd ask short questions about Ethan's day, about small details she noticed, but slowly the questions grew deeper. "Have you always been good with children?" he asked one evening, his voice low. She paused, setting down the cloth she was holding. "My little brother," she said softly. "He was autistic too. I grew up learning how to reach him when no one else could. He passed away a few years ago." Her eyes dimmed at the memory, and Nathaniel, for once, found himself at a loss for words. There was weight in her story, a gravity that explained her patience. She hadn't studied Ethan like a problem to be solved. She had lived it. She had loved it. And it humbled Nathaniel, who had thrown money at therapists and caregivers, but had never truly learned how to meet his son where he was. The changes in Ethan grew more noticeable, small, almost imperceptible shifts that meant everything. He laughed one afternoon as Amara spun a toy car across the polished floor, his giggle light and fleeting but real. Nathaniel, standing behind them, froze at the sound. He hadn't heard that laugh since his wife was alive. His throat tightened and he stepped back into the shadows, unwilling to let them see the emotion that cracked through his armor. But with each step forward came the sting of jealousy. Ethan sought Amara's comfort, often reaching for her hand instead of Nathaniel's. When storms rattled the windows, the boy ran to her side, pressing against her leg until she knelt to embrace him. Nathaniel told himself it didn't matter. What mattered was that Ethan was calmer, safer. Yet, deep inside, a raw ache festered. Why couldn't he be the one his son trusted? Why did it take a stranger to succeed where he, the boy's own father, had failed? One evening, Nathaniel confronted her indirectly. He found her in the hallway after putting Ethan to bed, her face tired but serene. "You've grown close to him," he said, his tone sharper than he intended. Amara looked at him steadily, her dark eyes calm. "He's a child, Mr. Drake. He needs connection, not distance." His jaw tightened. "Are you suggesting I've failed him?" She didn't flinch. "I'm saying he doesn't need perfection. He just needs you to be present." The words cut deep. Nathaniel turned away, hiding the storm behind his eyes. Pride told him to push back, to remind her of her place. But something in her voice, gentle, unyielding, stripped away his defenses. He wanted to argue, but the truth had already seeped in. Later, as he lay awake in the emptiness of his massive bed, Nathaniel replayed the sound of Ethan's laughter, the sight of his son leaning into Amara's touch, and the sting of her words. For years he had lived in a fortress of marble and steel, convinced he could control every outcome. But here was this Maid, dismantling his walls not with force, but with patience, empathy, and a kind of love he barely remembered. And for the first time, Nathaniel Drake realized he was no longer afraid of Ethan's silence. He was afraid of what it meant if Amara left, and the fragile world she had built inside his home crumbled with her absence. Nathaniel tried to convince himself he was still in control. He told himself Amara was only doing her job, that the improvements he saw in Ethan were temporary, that her presence was convenient but not irreplaceable. Yet the truth followed him everywhere, pressing on him like a weight he couldn't shrug off. His son was changing before his eyes, softening, opening, finding comfort in a world that had always frightened him. And it was because of her, not him. Not the endless doctors and expensive therapies. Her. It began to unravel one afternoon at the charity gala. Nathaniel had insisted Ethan attend with him, hoping to show the world that his son could belong in the spotlight of high society. The marble ballroom glittered with chandeliers, guests draped in diamonds and silk, cameras flashing at every turn. At first, Ethan stayed quiet, clutching the toy car he always carried. But as the crowd grew louder and the lights brighter, his small body stiffened. Nathaniel felt the shift, the storm brewing in his son's chest. But before he could react, Ethan erupted, crying out, dropping to the floor, his hands pressed over his ears. The crowd gasped. Murmurs rippled through the room. Nathaniel froze, shame flooding him, his face tightening under the judgmental stares of wealthy peers. He reached for Ethan, trying to pull him upright, but the boy screamed louder, thrashing in panic. Nathaniel's heart hammered, his grip faltering. Then Amara was there. She had slipped into the gala as part of the staff, dressed simply but carrying herself with a quiet strength. She dropped to the floor beside Ethan, ignoring the horrified whispers around her. "It's okay, baby. Look at me," she whispered, her hands moving slowly, rhythmically, as she breathed with him. "In and out. You're safe. I'm here." The ballroom held its breath. Slowly, painfully, Ethan's cries quieted. His small chest rose and fell with her breaths, his trembling easing as he buried his face into her shoulder. The scene was humiliating to Nathaniel and yet profoundly humbling. Where his wealth and authority had failed, her tenderness had succeeded. He felt stripped bare before the entire city, but beneath the humiliation, something else stirred. Admiration, longing, and the first sting of jealousy. That night, after they returned home, Nathaniel poured himself a drink and found Amara sitting quietly in the kitchen with Ethan asleep in her lap. The boy's face was peaceful, his fingers curled around the fabric of her blouse. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, watching them, the bourbon untouched in his hand. The way she held his son, humming softly under her breath, felt too intimate, too natural. Something inside him cracked. He wanted to be the one who could offer Ethan that comfort. He wanted to be the anchor, the safe place. But he wasn't. She was. The jealousy burned. It came out in words the next morning, sharp and undeserved. "You're overstepping," he told her as she folded linens. His voice was cold, controlled, but his eyes betrayed the storm. She lifted her gaze, steady and unafraid. "I'm doing what Ethan needs," she said simply. "This isn't about me, and it isn't about you, it's about him." The truth in her words cut deeper than any accusation. Nathaniel clenched his jaw, turning away, but her voice followed him, calm yet unyielding. "You think control will make him love you. But love isn't control, Mr. Drake. It's presence. It's patience." For hours, her words haunted him. He tried burying himself in work, staring at spreadsheets and contracts, but all he saw was Ethan clinging to her, Ethan laughing at her games, Ethan seeking her touch. And all he felt was the gnawing ache of inadequacy. But it wasn't just jealousy. It was something far more dangerous. He began to notice her beyond her role in the house. The way her laughter carried warmth into rooms long gone cold, the determination in her eyes, the scars of her past etched in quiet resilience. He found himself asking her questions late into the night, not just about Ethan, but about her, what she loved, what she had lost. She told him about her brother, about how she used to hum the same tune to calm him when the world felt too loud. She told him about growing up in small apartments, where her mother worked double shifts, and she learned early that compassion was survival. Nathaniel listened in silence, drawn to her honesty, her lack of pretense. He wasn't used to people speaking so plainly, without calculating what he wanted to hear. And when she laughed softly at her own memories, something inside him shifted. It had been years since he felt that kind of pull, that ache in the chest, that whispered of something forbidden but undeniable. One evening, he passed by Ethan's room and found the door slightly ajar. Inside, Amara sat cross-legged on the floor, Ethan nestled against her side, her hand stroking his hair as she read aloud. Her voice was low, steady, soothing. Nathaniel leaned against the wall, unseen, his chest tightening. The scene was simple, ordinary even, but to him it felt extraordinary. A vision of something he had lost with his wife's passing, something he never thought he would see again. Family. But family built on what? His walls were still intact, even if they were crumbling. He reminded himself she was an employee, a maid, a woman who belonged to a different world than his. Yet none of those truths stopped the rush of emotion when her eyes briefly lifted and caught his. For a moment, neither looked away. And in that silent exchange, Nathaniel realized the most dangerous truth of all. The mask he had worn for years was beginning to shatter, and the one woman who had the power to undo him was already deep inside his fortress. The air in the mansion had shifted, and Nathaniel felt it pressing on him like a storm brewing overhead. Ethan clung more and more to Amara, and though he tried to mask his emotions with stern silence, Nathaniel's pride wavered with every passing day. His empire outside the mansion was steady, stocks rising, deals closing. But inside his own home, the ground beneath him was unstable, and he wasn't sure whether it terrified him or set him free. The tension came to a breaking point one afternoon. Ethan had been playing near the pool, the sound of splashing water calming him, as it often did. Nathaniel was on a business call in the study when the sound of hurried footsteps shattered his focus. A maid burst in, face pale, words tumbling out. "Mr. Drake, Ethan, he's not by the pool anymore. We can't find him." The phone slipped from Nathaniel's hand. His heart lurched violently, cold sweat breaking across his skin. He bolted from the room, the world narrowing to a tunnel of panic. Staff scattered across the grounds, shouting Ethan's name. But it was Amara's voice that rose above the chaos, steady, fierce, calling for the boy as though he were her own. Minutes stretched like hours as Nathaniel searched frantically, his polished shoes sinking into the soft earth, his lungs burning. Then he saw them. On the far side of the estate grounds, near the hedge-lined garden, Amara knelt in the grass, cradling Ethan against her chest. Blood streaked across the boy's face and shirt, his lips split, his tiny hands shaking. Nathaniel's breath caught in his throat. His son's small body, trembling and smeared with red, pressed against Amara's uniform, her hands stained with his blood as she rocked him gently. For a moment, Nathaniel couldn't move. His entire world collapsed into that single image, his son, broken and bleeding, clinging not to him, but to her. Amara whispered softly, her words low and calm despite the fear in her eyes. "You're safe, baby. I've got you." "I won't let go," Ethan whimpered, his grip tightening on her blouse. Nathaniel finally stumbled forward, his voice raw. "Ethan, my God." His knees nearly gave out when he reached them. He crouched down, his trembling hands hovering over his son, unsure if touching him would help or make it worse. The sight of Amara's blood-stained sleeve and Ethan's pale face struck him with the sharpness of a blade. "He's going to be okay," Amara said quickly, her own breath unsteady but her tone unwavering. "It's not as bad as it looks. He tripped. He must have been running too close to the wall. The cut just bleeds more because of where it is." She pressed the cloth of her apron against Ethan's forehead, her movements steady, confident. Nathaniel's chest caved under the weight of guilt. He had been in his study, distracted by business, while his son bled. And yet, here was Amara, her entire being consumed with protecting the boy. She wasn't just doing her job. She was giving him something Nathaniel had never managed to give, unshakable comfort. When Ethan whimpered again, Nathaniel broke. His voice cracked, trembling as he whispered, "I should have been there. I should have." Amara looked up, meeting his eyes with an intensity that silenced him. "Don't do that to yourself now. He doesn't need a perfect father. He just needs you." Her words struck deep, cutting through years of armor. Something shifted then. Nathaniel reached out, his hand finally brushing his son's hair, sticky with sweat and blood. Ethan didn't recoil. He flinched, yes, but he didn't push him away. The boy's small hand remained fisted in Amara's blouse, but his father's touch lingered beside him, no longer a stranger, but a presence trying desperately, clumsily, to belong. The ambulance came, lights flashing, sirens distant. Staff hovered, whispering, but all Nathaniel could see was the woman kneeling on the grass, his son clinging to her like a lifeline. When the paramedics took Ethan inside, Nathaniel followed, but his gaze never left Amara. He saw the exhaustion in her shoulders, the streak of blood across her cheek, the way she swallowed her fear for the boy's sake. That night, after Ethan had been treated and settled safely back into bed, Nathaniel found Amara in the hallway, scrubbing her uniform furiously in the sink as though she could erase the stains faster than her mind replayed them. He stepped closer, his voice low, raw, almost pleading. "I don't know how to thank you." She looked at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You don't need to thank me, Ethan. He deserves love. He deserves to feel safe. That's all I want for him." The words pierced him, unraveling everything he thought he knew about loyalty, duty, even love. He reached out, his hand brushing her wrist. She froze, startled, and in that charged silence, the air seemed to thrum with something dangerous. His voice dropped to a whisper. "It's not just Ethan you've changed, Amara. It's me." Her breath caught, her lips parting as if to protest, but the moment was broken by the sound of Ethan stirring faintly in his room. Amara stepped back quickly, pulling her hand free, her expression shuddering. "Good night, Mr. Drake." Nathaniel stood alone in the hallway, his pulse still racing, his heart more exposed than it had been in years. He had built his life on control, on never letting anyone close enough to wound him again. Yet here was a maid with his son's blood on her hands who had dismantled his fortress without even trying, and for the first time he wasn't sure if he wanted the walls rebuilt. The mansion was quieter after the chaos of that night, but it was not a peaceful quiet. Nathaniel walked through the halls like a man carrying a weight too heavy for his shoulders. He had seen his son bleeding in Amara's arms, and though the boy was safe now, the image haunted him. He replayed her words again and again. "He doesn't need a perfect father. He just needs you." They rang in his ears like a judgment and a plea all at once. For days, Nathaniel tried to step forward in small ways. He sat closer during Ethan's therapy sessions, even when his son avoided his touch. He read aloud at night, his voice awkward, stumbling, while Amara sat nearby, gently guiding him when Ethan grew restless. Slowly, the boy began to let his father's presence linger without fear. The progress was fragile, but it was real. Nathaniel began to see that love wasn't in grand gestures. It was in showing up, in waiting, in being present even when it felt unbearable. Amara, however, kept her distance from Nathaniel outside of Ethan's world. She performed her duties, still with care, but her tone with him was cooler, guarded. The closeness they had almost reached seemed to terrify her. One evening, Nathaniel found her on the back terrace, staring out over the garden where the incident had occurred. The dusk light painted her face in soft shadows, but her eyes were tired, heavy. "You're pulling away from me," Nathaniel said quietly, his voice thick with something he didn't want to name. Her shoulders stiffened. "I can't be more than what I am here. You're my employer. That's the line." He stepped closer, the desperation in his chest pushing through his pride. "You're more than that. You've given my son something I never could. You've given me something I thought I lost forever." Her gaze flicked to him then, sharp and full of conflict. "Don't mistake gratitude for something else. My only concern is Ethan." Nathaniel's jaw clenched, but he didn't retreat. And mine. But somewhere along the way, I realized it isn't just gratitude I feel. It's more. I don't want to hide it. The silence stretched, heavy with emotion. She turned away, her voice low. Even if I wanted to believe you, people like me don't survive in your world. I've seen how it works. A Maid and a billionaire. It's a scandal waiting to happen. Nathaniel's answer came from the core of him, stripped of pretense. Then let it be a scandal. Let the world choke on its gossip. I don't care anymore. I only care about Ethan and you. His voice cracked, exposing a vulnerability he had buried for years. Amara's eyes softened despite herself, but she shook her head. You say that now, in this house, in this quiet. But out there, when the whispers start, when your board questions your judgment, will you still stand by those words? He didn't hesitate. Yes, because without you, I'm just a man with walls and money and nothing else. With you, I feel alive again. She looked at him for a long moment, her defenses wavering, but before she could reply, Ethan appeared at the door, clutching his toy car. His small voice broke the tension. Dad. The single syllable hung in the air, fragile and miraculous. Nathaniel froze, his chest seizing. Ethan had spoken to him clearly, without prompting, for the first time in years. Nathaniel's knees buckled as he dropped before his son, eyes flooding with tears. Say it again, buddy, he whispered, voice trembling. Ethan blinked, then repeated, Dad. He pressed the toy car into Nathaniel's hands, as if offering his trust. The sound shattered every wall Nathaniel had left. He pulled Ethan into his arms, holding him tightly, though his body shook with sobs. Amara stood in the doorway, her own tears spilling silently, watching the man and boy who had both been trapped in silence, finally finding each other. Later that night, Nathaniel found Amara in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she washed dishes. He stepped behind her, placing the toy car gently on the counter between them. You were right, he said softly. He didn't need perfect. He just needed me to be here. And I never would have known how without you. She looked at the toy, then at him, her breath catching. His next words came low, certain, every syllable heavy with truth. I love you, Amara. Not as a maid, not as someone who saved my son, as you. The woman who has given me back my heart. Her tears fell freely now, her hands gripping the edge of the sink. I don't know if I can believe in something like this, she whispered. He reached for her hand, wrapping it gently in his own. Then let me spend the rest of my life proving it to you. For Ethan, for us, for the family I never thought I'd have again. The silence stretched, filled with the sound of their breathing, the distant hum of the city outside. Finally, Amara's hand tightened in his, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of fear and hope. Then prove it. Weeks later, the park echoed with laughter. Ethan ran clumsily ahead, his toy car gripped tightly in one hand, his voice carrying in broken but beautiful words. Nathaniel and Amara followed, their fingers intertwined, the sunlight wrapping them in warmth. For the first time in years, Nathaniel Drake wasn't a man hiding behind money and control. He was simply a father, a man in love, walking beside the woman who had healed his son. And without knowing it, healed him too. Thank you for watching this powerful story all the way through. But here's the question. Did Amara truly find love with Nathaniel, or is there still a twist waiting in their future? Don't miss out on the next shocking tale. Smash that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We want to see how far this story travels. More betrayals, more redemption, and more heart-stopping stories are coming your way. Stay tuned.